So hello and welcome to this SuperOffice Supercharge webinar. We're going to talk about B2B sales and if the B2B sales team is going to survive the future. Of course they will, but it's just a matter of how and in which way are they going to develop. So I'm here today with Brian Andersen from Kvadrant. Warm welcome.
Nice to be here.
Yes, so we're going to spend a few minutes here to chit chat about this.
Yeah.
Super exciting topic. And just to be super clear from the beginning, this is a pre-recorded session. So the chat function functions. You will get the recording after the webinar, and we will also be participating and picking up questions after the webinar. So warm welcome. And my name is Mathias Sognefors. I am working with SuperOffice. I'm responsible for our Danish and Swedish market and our business there. But I have about 20 odd years in sales management, building, developing sales teams, and want to just share and maybe discuss some of the important topics that we've learned throughout the day and or throughout the years, and see where we'll go from here. But Brian, first, a few words about yourself.
Thank you, and hello everyone. So my name is Brian, and I'm a partner at the company called Kvadrant Consulting.
Yeah.
So we're a very specialized management consulting, only working with B2B sales and marketing.
Yeah.
So my own background is more from marketing actually, and then I kind of grew to love sales as well, and particularly this dynamic between more heavy, long deal cycle sales and also mixed up with e-commerce and all of these other things.
Yeah.
So yeah, we work with large Danish international companies on how to grow sales with a combination of sales and marketing.
Cool. And we came across each other and started talking about this exciting topic, and thought about maybe how about just recording a session to share some of the knowledge from Kvadrant Consulting and also our experience from SuperOffice. So why is B2B sales more complex today than before?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two things happening, right? One thing is, of course, that if you're a sales guy today, you're kind of pressured from two sides, right? So all of the easy sales you used to do, like the small transactional sales that just keep you going, a lot of those has actually moved to e-commerce, right? So what we typically call transactional selling, it's just better to do yourself, right?
Yeah.
And we see that in all industries, right? Whether it's medtech or software, whatever, you do more on your own as a buyer. And then, of course, let's say the more consultative selling is becoming harder, right? It's actually it's becoming more complex.
Yeah.
Because there's more people in the buying group. So suddenly there's also finance, procurement, and IT, and a legal. So buying groups are growing. So you have to deal with more stakeholders as a salesperson, which is super difficult. And then the last bit is, of course, that the buyer themselves, they are smarter than ever because of this small phenomenon called the internet. They are, of course, educating themselves more than ever before. So that's what we see often from our clients, that when the sales guy comes into a meeting, often the client actually knows, or potential prospect knows a lot about the industry, the products, and so on. So yeah, pushed from both sides and harder than ever to work in sales.
Yeah. And if we're going to frame who are we talking to today, we're talking about B2B sales.
Yes.
We're not talking about transactional sales that is, through digitally, through the web automatically. We're talking about more complex consultative sales, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah, where maybe a company has a product and a service. Sales cycles are a little bit longer than we talk about maybe months.
Yeah.
As also said, it's a different kind of value that's need to be delivered and perceived from the customer side.
Exactly, and I think it was never easy being in sales, but it's just getting harder and harder and harder because of these things. Right?
Yeah. So how do you see what has happened within the sales organization? When you look at different companies, we SuperOffice, we help companies on a daily basis with B2B sales and providing a platform for them to work better. We're not really going to talk too much about that currently, but what do you see from your perspective in organizations today? How they develop and let's say follow the flow with the challenges and opportunities.
I think if you walked into most sales teams, even just 5 years ago, they would look more or less like this, that everyone was kind of the same, let's say, level of seller, and they were typically divided into territories. Yeah, I do east of Denmark, you do west of Denmark, and I have a company car, you have a company car, and we ride around, right, and visit customers, and then we hire someone in south of Sweden, and then we expand like that. And that was kind of the, let's say, that's how you organized sales, right? Because a lot of the interactions were physical, to be honest, right? So this kind of territory, everyone is the same sales organization, has probably been the most prevalent way of organizing sales. And then I think, of course, kickstarted by COVID, but was underway before that was actually people looking at sales in a different way. That, hey, if it is getting more complex, there's more buyers, we need to be more specialized as sellers, we probably need to organize differently. And that can be many different ways. It could be verticals, right? Let's say we have a hospital expert if we're selling to hospitals versus a public sector expert. Anything where you put more knowledge into each salesperson and make them more specialized and deeper. It could be a different way of organizing sales, right? So you go from this, let's say, a team of sellers where they're all kind of the same to a team that sells, right? Where different people in the sales team have different roles, but they might be working on the same customer. I think that's the story. I think broadly specialization and away from this traveling territory salesman. I think that's probably the biggest change that's happening. Right?
Yeah. So it's more, if you put together a team, it's more like you really need to look at the capabilities, the attitude, the personal characteristics of each individual and how they serve the purpose of actually selling.
Yeah. And I'm actually curious how you guys work with that, because we tend to bucket sales into, here's a salesperson, and everyone has this mental idea of, that lone wolf, very charismatic, going out, closing deals. But at least in my experience, that's not how most salespeople actually are. There can be many different types of salespeople. So how do you kind of put that team together?
Yeah, if you look at SuperOffice, and I think we have a product, we have services, we are working with mature companies that are fairly process driven and so forth. So the way we work kind of represent also our target audience in many ways. And for us, selling is a team sport, absolutely. And what we see today is that it's becoming, if we're looking at new customer sales, it's a lot more around marketing collaboration with sales. So sales need to be a team player, an orchestrator in many ways, but also really, really understand the buying cycle or the buying behavior, I would say, and the logic behind that from our target audience. Today, 60-70% of the buying cycle of the time actually takes place when we are not interacting physically or in real life with our prospects and customers. So our team needs to work more digitally, be more adherent and observant and understanding the value that we drive during that, let's say, first period. And once the sales teams get engaged from a pre-sales perspective, from a seller perspective, consultants are also part of that. They really need to pick up where let's say with the same messaging and positioning that has been taking place during the first 60% of the time. That I think is the challenging part.
So that they are actually aligned with basic example, what is happening in marketing. We're going out and telling a certain story about our product, the market, whatever. When we go to a prospect meeting, we need to be able to speak to those things, right? Because that might actually be what the prospect has seen, right? I have a great example of that from one of our customers who they sell to hospitals, right? And in the past, they used to go to hospital and they had an hour meeting and coffee and presentation and slides and so on. Now they go in, they have 10 minutes, right? Because the buyer has done all the research already. They know the different products. They kind of know pricing and they kind of know distributions. They know all of the things already because they've seen it in other channels. And that means sales, they need to really, as you say, be a part of that team where, okay, they can be Zlatan here, but there needs to be another team that does all the other work before it, right?
Yeah, you cannot build a sales team of only Zlatans.
No.
That's for
maybe
certain.
It would be fun, interesting at least.
Well, not in the locker room. In the locker room, maybe. No, but one thing that actually struck me because we're talking about touch points here, we're talking about variable touch points, and everybody or many work also with, let's say, digital marketing. How do you, let's say, build value throughout the, let's say, the buyer's journey? And those touch points are of high quality today in many ways, meaning that we have valid content that is really relevant for our target audience. So I was in the car to our meeting here today, and I thought about maybe not everybody, this kind of explains how old I am, but Jan Karlsson, the former CEO of Scandinavian Airlines. He wrote a book that was called Riv Pyramiderna, Tear Down the Pyramids. Maybe a strange title, but one thing that made him successful with Linjeflyg and also SAS was that he looked at what are all the touch points, how do we deliver maximum value in all the touch points that a traveler traveling with SAS do, meaning check-in, baggage handling, boarding on the plane, etc. So because he was really focusing on that customer interaction and that kind of, the handover from the various steps, I think that's super important with B2B sales today. That everybody, that kind of brings back to the team aspect, that everybody is aware of what's the game plan, what's your role, what's the message, what's the value, and who are we talking to and with, and what actually is required to be relevant. And that I think is one of the biggest developments and changes in the digital world around B2B sales today.
And I think kind of exactly that when we look at kind of research of what our buyers doing, clearly they're now spending less and less time actually meeting with suppliers, which is tough, right? And that's the big mindset change, I think, where the SaaS story there, I think it really ties into what we're trying to achieve. Because in the past, you had that 1 hour, that was maybe most of the sales journey covered in one meeting. Now you have a lot of small interactions, like you said, you're checking in your baggage, you're watching a webinar, you're doing things online, you're on LinkedIn, you're connecting, etc. So I think having that buyer journey mindset is a really strong starting point, right? Like instead of saying, okay, what are we trying to sell to people? How can we help people buy throughout that buyer journey, which might be very long, and it is going to include a sales meeting, but might only be at the very end.
If we talk about, I was thinking about the toolings. Are there any, let's say, tools that are different today than before? We talk in a digital world.
Exactly.
From your perspective, what are the tools that you see, enhance what we talked about just now?
I think in general, I think what is incredible with sales today is that, so I come from a marketing background, and about, 10, 15 years in marketing, we started to get really tech and tool obsessed, right? And every marketeer today spends time in CRM, analytics, LinkedIn, ad platforms. They might have, 5 to 10 technology platforms that help them do their work. And that's great, right? And I think the same thing is happening in sales now, right? That I think, again, if you went back 5 to 10 years, a lot of selling was still done in a very analog way. At some point, you had to maybe enter some information in CRM, but you didn't use it to become more effective. It was kind of a reporting type thing. My manager tells me to put opportunities in CRM, I do it. Right? Where I think the big thing that's happening to sales today is that they're thinking about how can technology make me more efficient so I can sell more effectively to more people at the same time. So of course that's CRM, right? But it's also using things like, outreach platforms. LinkedIn is of course a massive driver for any B2B seller, right? Both in terms of classic outreach, but also in terms of how can I make a position for myself? How can I not be positioned as a salesperson, but as someone who's knowledgeable in my industry, who's an expert that you can ask things, right? I'm not just trying to sell you, some pencils and cups. I'm actually trying to help you achieve your goals. Right? So I think for me, those are kind of the two things. One is how do I make my backend more efficient? Like how do I spend less time filling in, CRM, doing a bunch of manual work? How can I make that part more efficient so I can spend more time selling? And when I'm doing selling, how do I kind of transition from I'm doing one-to-one selling, like calling someone or emailing someone, to sometimes also doing one-to-many? Right? How can I actually expand my reach to more people at the same time? And of course, you're right in the middle of this. So curious to hear a little bit about how does that actually play out in the real world when you're implementing that?
In the real world, just look at the way as I said, we are a good reference to our target audience as well. We see that if you're gonna support the whole journey, meaning for a company that wants to reach out and sell to other businesses, if you have a product and a service, aftermarket service, you really need to have a full 360-degree view on the client with the data, meaning that you need to know what kind of interactions do you have with them, what have you sold to them, what have you done, all the activities and everything that goes on. in order to provide a good customer experience. Because at the end of the day, you need to, as a sales rep, you need to understand what is going on within your clients today, even if they are your existing customer or if you are to become customer, you need to have more information. So we see that information integration and gathering that in a platform of some sort, CRM, and being able to utilize that in the processes that you're working with is key. And process is also another thing. It could be sometimes connected with negativity, but to be honest, if we're working today with, let's say, distributed sales teams, maybe geographically, and in a very on-the-fly way that we do today, strong process support for your key processes when it comes to serving and selling to your clients is important. So for us, I think it's the combination of all the surrounding tools around social platforms and whatnot, with the, let's say, the strong process support with a strong data platform as well in and around customer data. I think that's really, really important. We saw that in the pandemic. The companies that didn't really have a stronghold on that didn't succeed as good as others. So having a strong digital platform for your client data and the way you work and serve them, they came out better than the others. So and we see that now in the aftermath, that there's a strong digitalization movement within those that I think many people woke up at that time and said, well, we really need to be stronger in that area.
And how do you guys think about adoption? Because I think that's one of the things, of course, we also help sometimes companies with that. Hey, we have all these great ideas about customer data platforms, and at some point it relies on a human being, maybe someone in sales, connecting the dots between what's happening on the product. I need to do some data entry still myself, even though we're doing it better. And I need to work with these tools in a better way. And a lot of salespeople are on let's say, a learning journey, right, to make this happen. So, and maybe an interesting question, like this whole area of adoption, what's kind of your experience on working with companies on that?
I think adoption from a usability perspective, you mean, or
for using the tools, right? Being able to actually, we have this great CRM, we have this great tools at hand. Let's use them, right?
I think the ease of use is extremely important today. We've learned a lot from what has happened in the mobile industry, meaning that people today tend to buy business applications in the way they buy a Samsung or an iPhone. They want that same user experience. It should be easy to a new platform, a new tool should not make life more cumbersome. And we see that from our perspective when we talk to companies, that it's really high demand on, let's say, the user experience, and it should be very intuitive and whatnot, because that's where the bar is today. And we have also younger generations coming along here, and their demands are even higher. So, but I think from a technology perspective, the capabilities are there. It's just a matter of making sure that we really drive that digital arena within our company as well, and ensure that we have people, enable people to be digital in the way they operate and work. From a sales perspective, then, if we talk about trust, one thing that I came to think about, Brian, when you talked about what is developing, and trust is something which is very important within sales as well. When a sales rep steps into a room with a prospect or with a company, trust is something that we see, at least, is important. It's a really important factor that people buy from people today. Even though we're so digital, people at the end of the day buy from people, and they buy from people that they trust. And it's in order to build trust in a fairly short amount of time, where the first part of the time is also digital. It's a little bit. It could be a little bit complex. What should we tell companies when it comes to how should I say, enable or empower their teams when it comes to just
building trust,
to build trust and enforce that part of the equation?
I guess two perspectives for me is, like, one, all of the great material that's already been written on, like, how to be a trusted advisor and the trust equation and so on. Like, if you're into that sort of stuff, that methodology and thinking is still relevant. Like, it's still super relevant to build empathy and to show experience. All of these things are still relevant. I think the two things that I think are new for me is, one, it's sometimes possible now to do it at scale. And of course, that's where social selling and putting yourself out there becomes a really meaningful thing, because hey, you're actually engaging with people before you meet them physically, and that means they've seen you, they know you, they know your mannerisms and so on. They kind of know a little bit about who you are. So bringing yourself online, I think, is one of those things that enable trust, because hey, I've seen you before, I know kind of how you work. And so I think that's a big thing. And then the second thing about trust that at least I'm thinking a lot about now is also acknowledging how much the buyer knows, right? And because that, for me, also generates a lot of trust, that I know that you're not a complete stranger to this industry. You know the industry. You might actually know more than me in many areas. And like the most, it was something we discussed recently, is, for example, openly discussing competitors is one of my favorite things. Like when you step into that meeting, I know that you know this industry, so you know who are the competitors in the space, and you're trying to learn from me, right? What are the actual differences between these competitors? And that's where, by being a little bit vulnerable and acknowledging, yes, lots of players, I know them too, and you know them. Let's together work on what are the actual differences and what's relevant for your company. Whereas I think that's where in the past, sometimes you could be a little bit protective, right? And for me, that's something that kills trust, right? When the seller doesn't acknowledge that the buyer knows a lot, right? So respecting the buyer, I think, goes a long way to building that trust.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of that you just mentioned that scenario, because I had a conversation with a client the other day, and it was just that we talked about the difficulties in and around CRM is a difficult area. Being a buyer within the CRM area today is not easy. There is a lot of vendors there, and you really need to pick out who does fit me as a client. And for us as a vendor, we need to be super clear on who are we, you know,
and who are you not?
Who are we not
exactly.
Specifically, and that shines through super clear. And I think it's really important that we have I would say the courage to go into that conversation, because really we do not. If we look at SuperOffice, we stand for long-lasting customer relationships, and the customers stay with SuperOffice for a long time. And for us, it's important to have the skills and also the courage to have that conversation right up front. Because also the prospects and the customers demand that. So,
absolutely.
Anything else we could talk about here? Sales and marketing collaboration. You said, Brian, that you came from marketing. And one of the things that we drive heavily within SuperOffice today is how do we get the sales team and the marketing, both from a central perspective, but also from a field marketing perspective, to interlock.
Yeah, you're absolutely. It's a great topic, right? And again, coming from marketing, you kind of go through this phase of being a little bit mad at sales, right? You're a little bit tired of, why don't these guys fill in CRM? And why don't they do what I say? And so on and so forth. And then at some point you kind of, internalize that, hey, they're not actually bad people, right? We're just different people looking at the same topic in a different way. So we tend to say, like, there's kind of three things that are needed for that strong marketing and sales collaboration that are relevant for any relationship, actually, right? And there's a little bit of marriage counseling here as well, right? And the first one is that empathy, right? That as a marketeer, I understand that you are great at some things that I am not, right? And that just common empathy of saying, yeah, we're trying to achieve the same thing, but we're great at different things, and really understanding that. And I think many marketeers, to be honest, have been kind of stuck in a sales are stupid, honestly, type of thinking, and super unfortunate. And maybe the same vice versa. So strong empathy is one thing, right? And then, of course, there's the second part, which is then, okay, we need to have a common vision and strategy. And that's, of course, sometimes where, there can be a little bit of misalignment, right? Between what is the sales department trying to do in terms of short-term closing customers and so on, where sometimes marketing is on a different path, right? Looking at different verticals or trying to achieve different things and so on. So that's got to be there, right? And again, if we were in a relationship, it would be, where do we live? How many kids do we have? Where do we go on holiday? So those type of things, even though we're different, we need to agree. And then the last thing that we always speak to is joint initiatives. And again, if a relationship is like, we got to do things together, because otherwise we won't like each other. And it's the same thing in sales and marketing. Let's find some of those initiatives where we work together we're active together, we do things in a joint way, we do joint planning, joint target setting, all of those things. So it's so crucial. And as you said, as we started, it's never been more important than now, where marketing owns, let's say, a bigger portion of that sales journey. Right?
I think also the understand where we come from, because sales organizations, B2B sales organizations, typically are a little bit nearsighted or short term, whereas marketing in many ways, you have a long game kind of agenda in terms of awareness and branding and, let's say, positioning. Whereas B2B sales organization might want to say, we need leads in a very short term. And you find that balance with activities on the short term and the long term. I think it's important to understand that. Also, I think that you have a common view on the positioning and the messaging. This is something that we work a lot with, and something that companies should, I think, work with on a more or less on an annual basis or whatnot, at least on a periodical basis, in terms of positioning for who do you really mean a lot, and how do you message that? How do you reach out to them and understand, communicate with that group of prospects and customers, and that we have a common view within sales and marketing and across the board in the company that these are our target audience, because segmentations of to understand, let's say, your target audience is one of the first starting points when it comes to let's say, establish that collaboration. So some word of advice then, if we're going to conclude. We talked a little bit here about various topics within B2B sales and how you build the teams, but if we're just going to sum it up somewhat, a few words of advice for our listeners here on the webinar.
Absolutely. So I guess, we talked a little bit about, okay, why is it important now? And that's because, sellers are challenged, buyers are getting smarter, journeys are becoming longer, more informed, etc. So that's kind of the why are we here, right? And then I think, okay, what can we actually do? Let's start at the end, right? Strong marketing and sales collaboration for me is one of them, right? That is a lever to get better results out of, funny enough, both teams actually. And then I think from a sales, let's say, organization perspective, then our discussion around thinking as a sales team and not as a team of sellers, I think that's a major mind shift change of, we can't all be Zlatans. Somebody has to play support, somebody has to score the goals, and somebody has to keep goals from going in. So I think that would be the second thing for me, right? Really strongly interrogating, how do I organize, structure, compensate, set goals for sales that enable it to be a team and not 10 lone wolves all chasing their own business. And then I think the third thing is also leaning into, let's say, modern sales and marketing, whether that's tools, right? Or whether that's, let's say, social selling, all of these abilities that digital channels and so on give us, so that all the things that's happening out there of buyers self-educating, that has to be a strength and not a threat, right? It has to be a strength that, buyers are self-educating. That's fantastic. Then I can get in front of them before we have our meeting. So when we have our meeting, they already know me. That's great, right? So I think leaning into what's happening there as an opportunity and as a strength, I think there would be those three things top of my mind.
Very good comments. And I just want to round off with, if we're just going to talk about sales and sales individuals, to me, being a value driver, striving to be a value driver in your domain, if that is a vertical or if that is a subdomain of a vertical, or if that is wherever that now might be, really need to take ownership of how do you become a value driver within that domain. That is hard, but it requires a large degree of interest. You really need to be concerned about the well-being of your clients and prospects. I think that's, if you're not, you need to get your arms around that, because I think that's what the expectation level is out there. And this is about change. What is changing outside the window here is it's the world is in constant change, and the pace has never been as slow as it is today. So it will only go faster. Scary enough, but you need to feel comfort also in change within this. So how you work, how you acquire personnel into your sales teams, how you develop them, and how you coach them in order to work as a team player, because selling is a team sport, is something that really is something you need to work with on a daily basis, from an individual perspective, from a management perspective, and from a corporate perspective. So in order to be successful out there, because it's super exciting what is going on right now, all the capabilities are out there. So it's a fun time to be working within B2B sales.
Absolutely.
So answering the first question then, will the B2B sales times survive the future? I say yes.
Absolutely.
If you pick up some of the points that me and Brian have talked about today, maybe.
Absolutely, yeah. Never been a better time to be a seller if you're good at it.
So Brian, thanks a lot for stopping by
Thank you.
and to have this conversation. And audience, feel free to post your questions in the chat now. So we'll be happy to answer them. Thanks.
Thank you.